this is about moose rutting groups, and moose are members of the deer family, and the deer family includes several diverse species that have a variety of different social structures. Some members of the deer family live in groups and are social animals, and other members of the deer family, like moose, are more solitary. And moose basically lead solitary lives, and they don't engage in very much social behavior outside the rut. We did a study here of moose activity and behavior during the summertime, and only 2% of the time was spent on social behavior. The rest was spent feeding and resting and foraging and moving. But during the rut, moose do form aggregations here. And those aggregations can be as large as 30 or more individual animals, and there's a lot of interaction and social behavior that goes on at that time. Generally, the rut here starts about August 25th, and that's the date when the velvet comes off the antlers of males. But there isn't actually any mating until about September 25th, and then all of the mating occurs in about a 2-week period between roughly September 25th and October 7th. And so there's a whole month of preliminaries then between about August 25th and the first mating. And these groups begin to form fairly early on. There have been several questions that we looked at regarding the dynamics of these moose rutting groups. For example, do these groups occur in traditional areas year after year? What is the different role of males versus females in these groups? Are there changes in composition of the group and stability of the group as the rut proceeds? And what is the loyalty of individual animals to those groups over time? In much of North America, moose do not form rutting groups during the fall. They form pair bonds. In fact, Margaret Altman published one of the earliest studies of moose behavior in North America, and she described this pair bond system where a bull seeks out a cow, forms a bond with her, and remains with her until she comes an estrus and they mate. But here in the north, and in Alaska, and in Denali in particular, they do form rutting groups. And there are several reasons for this. First is the sex ratio in the population here. For every male, there are about 3+ females in this population in the park, and that's all males. There are roughly 6 to 7 females for every large dominant bull, and those are the bulls that do the mating. And so that facilitates, that's one of the things that facilitates this aggregation phenomenon. Secondly is calf survival. The calf survival here has been consistently and persistently low for the last 20 years. About 80% of the calves on average that were born between 1975 and 1995 were dead within the first 2 months of life. And so that provides a lot of females in the population during the rutting season that are without calves and that are prone to aggregate. Cows with calves do not aggregate. Well, the habitat that these groups occur in is pretty widely variable. They occur in dense spruce forest, and they occur right out on the shrub tundra. Are there traditional places where there are rutting groups? And the answer is yes. And those of you familiar with the park know that along the park road from mile roughly 5.5 to 10.5, where the closure is now in effect, and you see those big signs and the little signs next to the road, for many years that area has held from 1 to 3 rutting groups during the rutting season. What about movements of these groups? How widely do they range, and how small an area do they occupy? Well, they do move. The cows continue to feed during this entire rutting season, and their movements to different sites in which they find adequate forage determine the movements of the group. We've seen those groups move linearly about 3 miles during the progression of the rut from early September right on through early October. Well, this little cartoon tells the whole story here regarding what drives the process, and it's the female reproductive cycle that drives the process and determines really the formation of these groups. These are not harems in the same sense that elk have harems and that bulls actually herd cows and control the movements of cows. The cows actually aggregate and form these groups, and a cow can leave the group at any time. The bulls do try to herd them and control them, but a cow can outrun a bull and can leave at any time. So it's the female reproductive cycle that governs the progression of the events during the rut, as well as the dynamics of the individual groups. Well, the groups first form in early September. I took this picture somewhere around September 1st one year. And moose go through what's called the silent estrus, in which the female reproductive system is gearing up for the time when she's receptive to mating. But that's not going to be until the last week of September. And so September 1st is when the first indications of this gearing up of the female reproductive cycle occur, and it's when these first rutting groups begin to form. But these groups are very ephemeral. 3 days from after this picture was taken, you could go to any one of those animals and they may be with other moose or they may be with themselves, but the chances of this group persisting for more than a day or two are very, very low. It's not really until about September 20th that these groups begin to gel and that the individuals within those groups begin to persist, and they'll stay in those groups right on through the time when the females breed and rutting is over. The females form these rutting aggregations without leaving their normal summer home range. They aggregate within their normal home range. The males, however, may move long distances to come to those rutting groups. We've had radio-collared moose here that have spent the summer in the sanctuary and Teklenika drainages and come clear on over to here at the east end at mile 7 or 8 and join these groups. Well, here's some group size data group data that we collected early on in the study. We divided the rut into 3 different periods here. This is roughly August 25th to September 10th, September 11th to the 24th. And this is the time when breeding occurs, mating occurs, September 25th to October 7th. Now there you see the group size of the groups that we looked at. The median really doesn't change significantly, and you see that even early on, this first period of the rut, there are large groups that occur, as large as 23, as large as during the time when mating is actually occurring. Here you see percent of groups with calves, very low to begin with, picks up a little bit mid-rut. By the time when breeding is occurring, there are substantial numbers of these groups that contain cows with calves. Some of the cows with calves come to those groups to mate with bulls, but they don't stay there very long. The cow is in estrus about 24 hours, and they can be with these groups for only a matter of a few hours, and then they tend to leave. Well, it's the large males that control the mating rights to these groups, and a bull obtains mating rights to that group by intimidating or fighting challengers. There are other bulls that are not in charge of a group that are wandering, looking for groups that they can take over. And fights are fairly common, and turnover of large males for any one given group is quite high. We've seen groups that have had as many as 6 or 7 different bulls in charge of that group during the course of the rut. And they take over those groups either by intimidating the bull that's there so that he leaves without a fight, or by fighting with the dominant bull and taking over. Fighting among bull moose is fairly common, especially during the time when breeding occurs. And that's a whole other story that I don't have time to get into. These dominant bulls are the ones that mate with the cows. 88% of the matings that we have observed here have included these large dominant bulls. Only 12% of the mating occurred by what we call satellite bulls, which hang around the edges of these groups, hoping to find a female while the dominant male is occupied doing something else. With these large groups, these groups of 20 or more females, for example, on any given day there may be 3 or 4 cows that are in estrus at the same time, and the dominant bull is busy trying to mate with them and chase off any challengers. And so these satellite bulls then can come in occasionally and mate with cows, but the dominant bulls are efficient in keeping the satellite bulls away from the cows most of the time. Well, by the peak of the rut here, it's typically time for snow. This picture was taken the last week of September, and many years at that time there is snow on the ground, and it's going to persist. How loyal are females to these groups? Well, they're quite loyal once those groups begin to gel in mid-September. Our radio-collared cows very rarely leave a group and go to another group. It does happen on occasion. Sometimes it happens because they are unhappy with the bull in charge. Some of these bulls become aggressive and try to herd the cows too much. Cows will tolerate that for a time, but then they leave. These groups dissolve quickly after about October 7th. Mating is virtually complete at that time. The groups dissolve and the moose then go off and feed intensively before winter hits. See, my light is on, my time is up, and so I'll stop right there. Thank you.